All right, I'm Craig Hoffman, continuing for bonus coverage of the Hoffman Show here on the Team 980 because we have massive breaking news. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN reports that the Wizards have fired general manager Tommy Sheppard. Sheppard had been promoted from interim GM in 2019. He was let go after the Wizards missed the playoffs this season. He had been with the organization since 2003 in the front office. This is obviously a massive surprise. Ted Leonsis has been as loyal as an owner as anybody in sports. He is someone who, and also someone who cares a lot about the bottom line and finances in terms of these things. He lets people go at the end of their contract. Part of that is the finances. Part of that is a commitment to say, I signed you to do this job. I'm going to give you the time to do it. Why all of a sudden now he decided to fire Tommy Sheppard is something that I am fascinated to find out why. Because on paper, the only thing that doesn't make sense about this is it didn't happen the day after the season. Tommy Sheppard has been the GM since 2019, and the Wizards have not made the playoffs outside of a shortened season with COVID, where Russell Westbrook helped guide them, who he then traded away. And I said at the time Sheppard was hired, his job was extremely hard. The financial situation the Wizards were in because of the John Wall contract, which everybody loved John. He was incredible. It was a risky contract to sign because of its largesse and his injury history and his style of play and all of these different things. And then it turned out to be far worse than anyone could have imagined. It basically became the worst contract in the sport. And Tommy deserves whatever credit you can possibly give a guy who has his track record now over the course of 4 years of getting them out of that hole. He got them to a point where the roster was workable, where the roster actually was something that had a path. But he also missed some of the exit ramps on doing a harder reset and getting to the point where he got out of the hole of Wall's contract and turned it into something that actually could win a championship. And the fact that he has been so steadfast in his plan and says, we're going to re-sign Kyle Kuzma, we're going to re-sign Kristaps Porzingis, that he signed off on giving Beal this incredible contract that no one has ever had in the history of the league with a no-trade clause in it, is just an indefensible resume. Now, what I will say is this. I've been consistent on this the whole time. I don't believe it was Sheppard's call to give Beal said contract. But what is his call is how he builds around that and how he executes it. And perhaps Ted looks at him and goes, hey, man, why did you yes-man me? If that was such a bad idea, then why did you say yes? Or perhaps there was a disagreement where Tommy went to Ted and said, hey, man, we can't do this with Beal. I'm tired of defending the guy. I'm tired of putting my reputation on the line. And Tommy said, and Ted said goodbye. Like, it's just too early in this process to know exactly what happened here in terms of what the disagreement, the timing, all of that kind of stuff. But in a statement, Ted Leonsis ascribes it to a failure to make the playoffs the last 2 seasons, which he says was, quote, very disappointing to our organization and our fans, in a statement. This is really, frankly, stunning. And what's, I would say, so bizarre about it stunning this, to kind of rehash what I said at the top, is it shouldn't be that surprising at all. The track record is not good enough. And Wizards fans deserve so much more. You know, this franchise has not won 50 games since it won a title in the late 70s. It has been through mostly mediocrity, occasional spotlights of joy. But at the end of the day, like, this is a city where basketball should thrive. And instead, it's become such an afterthought. There is, though, I can tell you, like, as someone who did a lot of Wizards coverage this year and had the great pleasure of joining Dave on the broadcast and Glenn on the broadcast, and, you know, had a lot of Wizards content that we did in the digital space, which allows for a lot more interaction where people are leaving comments and tweets and look, like I did the interview with Tommy where, a lot of people felt like he finally had his feet held to the fire, and hearing the reaction on that, I don't bring that up to like rehash that other than to say it was an example of where the passion is still there. People want this team desperately to be good. People desperately want this team to do more. And I think one of the mistakes that Leonsis has made and Tommy has executed in rather spectacular fashion is thinking that just being mediocre and trying hard is going to be enough to be, we're trying to be the best that we can. We don't want to be terrible. And I think we're at a stage in basketball discourse where we just are smarter than that, where I think most fans realize that if you're going to genuinely compete for a championship, you have to have one of the 6 to 7 best players in the sport. And that number used to be 1 to 3. We are in an unparalleled era of parity in the history of the NBA. We've never seen this. We've never had it where 5 to 8 teams could legitimately win the title and it wouldn't be some kind of massive upset. But really, kind of the last time we had not that was 2019 or 2018, the last time the Warriors won. In 2019, obviously, they get bit by injuries. Kawhi and the Raptors win. Kawhi moves on to LA. The whole league is busted wide open. And ever since, we've had different champions. The Warriors have come back around. The Lakers won in the bubble. You had Giannis gets his. Like, it wouldn't be no surprise if, Embiid gets his or Jokic gets his or Giannis gets another one. Like, we've never seen that. And I think the problem with this team, and what I hope Leonsis realizes, is that the path is wider than it's ever been. But you still need one of those guys, and you within your city, within your team, within your roster, need to find a way to actually get one of those guys. And if you lock yourself in, like they have with Beal, to not one of those guys for big money, like you then can't sign a couple other guys that are kind of the same. And I remember we talked about mid-season. The Ringer does a list that they update a couple times a year of their top 100. They actually expanded it out to 125. And Bradley Beal came in like the high 40s. You can't build a championship roster around a $250 million player who's the 47th best player in basketball. And then pair him, your grand plan is to pair him with the 68th best and the 75th best in Kristaps Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma? Like, it's untenable. And again, I don't know what the impetus is for Ted to do this now. The most recent piece of Wizards news is they lost the draft lottery tiebreaker to the Pacers and now have, I think, a 6.7% shot of getting in the top 3 instead of the 6.8 the Pacers have. I'm going to guess that wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back in any way, shape, or form. So I have a lot, honestly, like, stunned because it happened, because this is so against what Leonsis has done during his time. But I have more questions at this point than answers. Do I have opinions on Tommy Sheppard? Yes. Do I have opinions on Ted Leonsis? Yes. Do I have opinions on this basketball team and where it goes and what they should do? And, yes. But I have massive questions. Why? Why now? Like, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? Why did it happen on April 19th? And then, moving forward, like, who are they looking at next? And what is that person going to do with Kyle Kuzma? What is that person going to do with Bradley Beal? Are they going to go to Bradley Beal and be like, hey, man, thanks for everything. We can't wait in 10 years to bring you back and retire your jersey, but we need you to waive that no-trade clause because we need to shop you because we need to start over. What does it mean for Kristaps Porzingis, who I think could be here for part of a rebuild and be very helpful, or could be shipped out, but he also has control over that situation. Kuzma, by the way, is an unrestricted free agent. They have no control over what happens to him. And so the timing of this from a team building perspective is rough. If you were going to rebuild, you needed to decide to do that in January, February, but they went for it against all available data and odds. And now this is where we are. So those are the questions I have. I'm curious your reaction. We're going to stay on the air for a little bit 301-230-0980. Collect our thoughts. Come back with some of your phone calls. Again, breaking news. The Wizards have fired general manager Tommy Sheppard. He had been with the team since 2003. He is out. More reaction coming next on the Team 980.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, anxiety meds, everything on them.
All right, Hoffman Show extending with breaking news here on the Team 980. We also are streaming live on YouTube as well. Team 980 YouTube page. If you're walking around your house, throw us on your smart TV, etc., etc. 301-230-0980. We are taking your calls. Danny Rouyer is going to join us as well. Getting reaction from around the basketball world. Again, the Wizards have fired Tommy Sheppard. It happened literally as we went off the air. I turned my mic off, looked at my phone, and then screamed through the glass at Anthony, and then panicked. But we've settled down. We're here taking your calls. 301-230-0980. Let's get some fan reaction in, and then we'll get to some of the questions that I still certainly have about what this means moving forward. Let's go to Rod. Rod, thanks for calling. Get us started here on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, what's up, man? Look, I just got two things, really. So the first thing is, even if the Wizards end up one pick, I'm convinced they still probably wouldn't pick the right guy. I mean, it's like they done had top 5 picks, 1 pick I think John Wall was number 1 or 2 or whatever. I think Bradley Beal was a top 5 pick, I think. But it just seemed like they just, for whatever reason, they just end up not picking the right guy anyway. And then, I mean, I'm trying to figure out, man, what is it about the nation's capital that keep these guys, these superstars, from really wanting to come here? I mean, you know, it's a nice city. It's not far from other big cities.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of things here. I just don't understand. You know, it's a basketball town, high school basketball, college basketball at one point. I don't understand why these guys and these superstars, some of these superstars, I mean, they just overlook the Wizards. I think about Sabonis. He ended up in Sacramento. You know,
he was a trade guy there. Garrett, I'm going to let you go because we got a lot of calls, but it's a good question. I'll answer it. So much of what NBA players want is prestige, and this is why players go to the Knicks, not the Nets. But that is starting to change. I was listening to a pod. It was JJ Redick's pod. God, who was the guest? It was Richard Jefferson was the guest. And RJ was a part of those teams in the early 2000s with Jason Kidd and Vince Carter that made the NBA Finals. So all of a sudden the Nets were good. And then you had Paul Pierce and KG, and like they were good. And, you know, there was a little bit of prestige of Jay-Z was the owner of the team. And the Knicks also stunk for 20 years. And nobody, like, if you knew anything about the owner, you knew that he was a terror in James Dolan. And so now when KD and Kyrie were looking at New York, they were looking at Brooklyn, not the Knicks. But we see that starting to change, right? The Knicks are all of a sudden good again, and Madison Square Garden's still Madison Square Garden. And so I think the Knicks are now back kind of in their pecking order, and if there was a big free agent that wanted to go to New York, they would probably look at the Knicks. The Heat have been a great organization forever. There's history of winning there. The Lakers, the ultimate example. Celtics. Like, do dudes really want to live in Boston? No, they want to play for the Celtics. But what does it mean to play for the Wizards? It means to never win 50 games and get stuck in the first round most of the time. And I will say, if you can get someone who is drafted here and treat them the way John Wall was treated, like, that's great. Because he's a guy who was treated like royalty and I think genuinely enjoyed his time here and has talked about that. Like, I love D.C., I got love for the city, and if it was up to John, he would have never left. So if you can draft the right guy, let's say all of a sudden this 6-point-whatever% pays off and they win the lottery and not even get Victor Wembanyama. Let's say they get second and get Scoot Henderson, because I do think the international guys look at it a little different. Giannis in Milwaukee. Giannis, he didn't have any idea about a prestige of American cities. He grew up in Greece. But so Wembanyama coming from France, like, who knows? He's a wild card. But when it comes to a guy like Scoot Henderson, if he comes here, who's projected second pick in the draft and is treated like John Wall was treated for the majority of his career, and Ted does a great job of owner of like treating him like a star, which Ted has done probably to too many players as opposed to not enough players, then maybe those things start to change, and a generation of fans grows up seeing the Wizards be great, and in that generation of fans is the next great player, and he wants to come here, and it changes. But right now, like, if you're chasing prestige, if you're chasing organizational excellence, if you're chasing winning, none of that is in D.C. And I think, hopefully, that's what Ted is trying to change by moving on from Tommy. Again, Danny Rouyer will join us to react to the breaking news in just a few minutes. The breaking news is that the Wizards have moved on, fired Tommy Sheppard, their general manager. Craig Hoffman with you, staying late here for some bonus edition Overtime Hoffman Show. Let's go to Greg. Greg, thanks for calling. You're on the Team 980.
Hey, I think it was a combination of the success of teams like Sacramento and OKC, along with some really bad personnel decisions. You know, Rui Hachimura scored 29 points the other night in the playoff game. And I just think that, it's, like somebody said before, it's the personnel decisions to me. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of Coach Wes Unseld Jr. either, because I don't understand his substitution patterns or anything that he's really doing. And we need some junkyard dog type of, Draymond Green, maybe without all the drama, but Draymond Green type of guys who are physical, got some attitude, and some edge. And our team overall it plays pathetic defense, and they're kind of soft. So maybe Ted looked at it and saw young teams like Sacramento, Cleveland, OKC have kind of gone past the Wizards and just, came to the conclusion that, hey, we need better personnel.
Yeah, no, Greg, it's a good thought. I mean, I've talked about with Wes, and look, Wes's job is probably safe for now, but a new GM comes in, and who knows? And especially if a new GM comes in and it's someone that comes from one of these winning teams and there's an assistant on that team, like could Wes Unseld still be fired this cycle? It's possible. I would say it's probably unlikely. But the idea that looking at like what could have changed, right? Like that was one of the questions that I asked earlier, in terms of why now? What is it that happened now versus at the end of the season? If you watch Oklahoma City in the playoffs, if you watch Sacramento in the playoffs, you watch these young teams that were good in Oklahoma City's case with Durant and Westbrook and even competitive in some of those years post, and then you watch, Sacramento come from the ashes, a team that was thought to be like the worst run in the NBA with the worst owner in the league, and all of a sudden they're good. And if they can do it, you're telling me we got to have patience in a process? Like, get out of here. In a literal sense. Maybe that's what Ted said. All right, let's go to the hotline. Danny Rouyer, co-host of Grant and Danny on the Team 980. Danny, are you disappointed that you didn't even have to use a countdown this time?
Crazy. Dude, you were just chronicling this. I did not see this coming. I'm really, really surprised by this. I don't know how you felt about it, but this kind of came out of nowhere to me. I sort of thought this was status quo here. And the mandate was, from Ted on down. This is what the organization was doing, building from the middle, something that we've got, it's a small sample. It's about 44 years of trying it out. It hasn't worked yet, but maybe we'll see it come to fruition. But I thought everybody was on the same page, and I'm wondering if it wasn't, Oklahoma City coming on, as you mentioned, with Gilgeous Alexander and three different guys named Jalen Williams, really surprising people and being frisky, and how good Sacramento has been to this point. I'm wondering if there's a sample out there, and all of a sudden we went, wait a minute, this isn't what was advertised to me. All of my core is in their late 20s, super highly paid, and we can't even make the play-in tournament. That all of a sudden, doesn't feel like what I signed up for. So I'm pretty surprised by this move, man.
Again, Danny Rouyer with us. The news, Tommy Sheppard has been let go by the Wizards, reacting to it here on the Team 980. I mean, you and I are on the same page here, and that's because, we all kind of have the same info because it was correct. Like, the reason Bradley Beal got the deal that he did was because Ted wanted to give it to him, and so he did. And for the GM to take the fall for that on some level feels unfair, but you also look at the resume and you're like, yeah, no, that guy doesn't deserve to be an NBA general manager, especially if he's been around not just the last 4 years, but since 2003. So we're like, do you think that a new GM could come in and convince Ted to try something different, considering how long they've been going down the same path?
That's the billion-dollar question, right? I mean, that's it. Now, I like Tommy Sheppard. He's got that wonderful outlook, and he's very kind, and he's been generous with his time and very forthright. And I do wish him the best, and I mean that. That's not just lip service.
Yeah,
but
no, agreed.
You're 100% right. Yeah, the resume speaks for itself. Now, I would say he was better than Ernie Grunfeld, which is saying that one is more than zero. Grunfeld would get you those mid-30s wins, but give away all the first-round picks to Phoenix pretty much for, half a decade. At least assets were around here. Now, they haven't materialized in anything. They haven't drafted particularly well. There's always the Avdia instead of taking a Tyrese Halliburton, or, you could sort of run through the litany of ththings. You had to trade Rui Hachimura so Denny could get minutes. I don't understand some of those pathologies. The resume isn't particularly good when it comes to that. I always wondered, Craig, you and I, hoop heads in this town, what's the mandate? What's the organizational expectation? What are we actually going for here, right? And if Tommy's vision was to rebuild and reboot this thing, which should have happened multiple times over, when you max out at 33, 34 wins with Bradley Beal as your best player, that's what should have happened, and it never did. Is that a general manager's fault? Is that Ted Leonsis' vision's fault? I don't know the answer to that. A new GM, if he's objective and smart, will come in and say, listen, you could go for it with this group. If everything is great, you're the sixth seed. First of all, when's everything great? And second of all, that's not the point of this whole exercise. That's not the point of this thing. I have no interest in that, but it seems like Ted has in the past. So any new GM coming in is certainly going to face that ideological challenge of working for Ted Leonsis and potentially the long haul to kind of unscrew this thing to really kickstart a rebuild, which would certainly take some time. And it all depends on certainly what happens here in this lottery, which Wizards fans always know works out great for us. Whatever the last possible pick is, we know we're getting that, so enjoy the ninth pick here in a few weeks. But that's how it feels. This is a quandary for new GM to certainly walk into with a couple huge salary decision-making, sort of necessities over the next couple of months.
Right. So just as a couple of hoops guys spitballing here, since that's what we're doing. I've wondered in the past, because there's been rumors of guys like Tim Connolly, right, who was running Denver. Now he's the president in Minnesota. It seems unlikely that they could pry him away from Minnesota because you can't give a job better than president. But maybe. Masai Ujiri, there's been rumblings in the last couple of years. He might be kind of ready to do something else after a very successful run in Toronto. And I always kind of wondered, especially with Masai, if he had conversations with Ted, and part of those conversations was like, look, man, I know Brad's your guy, but like we're going to have to move on from him. There's no way we can build it around. Do you think Ted could possibly budge on that side of it and say, hey, we're going to have a new GM come in and have a conversation with Brad, and we'll try to get him to somewhere that's got sunshine and rainbows that he really likes, but we're going to need him to waive that no-trade clause and start over, and that might be a path that he's never been willing to go down before?
Yeah, again, those are the challenges, right? Any new voice that comes in, by the way, I just thought of a cool title, Super President. So now you can get Tim Connolly if you want him.
Bam.
So,
now the Commanders can hire someone over Rivera, too, but we're not talking about that right now.
I know we're not. But that would be the gist, right, is you'd have to have somebody with enough cachet to say, we're not doing this. And it always feels like, Craig, that we end up beating up on Bradley Beal, and I never mean to. He's a really good player who's done nothing wrong in this entire circumstance. It's the simple misevaluation fact that you're paying him like you pay Nikola Jokic, who's going to either finish first or second in voting again and is cruising Western Conference and 35 games. We've seen the sample. We've got it. We know what it is, right? So that's the mistake. It's not Beal's fault in all of this, but that's what's best for the organization. It was best 2 years ago. It was best last year, and it was best all season, including at the trade deadline. That's the thing. If you're determined to go at this thing with Bradley Beal as the best player, I don't know how you thread that needle, given the amount of money that he makes. He, to me, is the perfect second scorer that doesn't always need the ball in his hands. He's better off the ball than he is with it. You saw some of the playmaking, sort of tick up along with those turnovers where he's just punting the ball like Tress Way on fourth down in Rivera's offense for so many fourth quarters when it's him going one-on-one in crunch time. But when he's off the ball, he can be really effective as a scorer. Look at all the percentages that went up this year, for example, and all the efficiency things when he was off the ball a lot more. That's a great complementary player on a really, really good team, especially if you don't ask him to play a lot of defense. If you ask him to be the star, you're screwed. That's what has to happen. He's got to go to kickstart some kind of rebuild or some kind of perfect utopian version of basketball that I haven't figured out yet, and they certainly haven't either. And Giannis and any other good player in the Eastern Conference happens to sprain their ankle the same week. Maybe a chance.
Right. And that this like gets to the what's next, and obviously you'll be talking about this with Grant tomorrow on your show over on 106.7 The Fan, is like, what does this impact, or what's the impact on Kyle Kuzma? What's the impact on Kristaps Porzingis? Because those are the aforementioned huge salary decisions they have to make this summer. If Ted were to call you and be like, hey, Danny, I've been listening to you for a long time, buddy, old pal. What would you do this offseason? Like, what's your hope for this new GM realistically within the constraints of the Wizards' reality now that someone new is going to be coming in to guide it?
First of all, Mr. Leonson, I'm sorry most of those were jokes. Second of all, no, I want no part of either of those guys. And it's not because they're bad players. It's, right. In fact, I was dead wrong about Kyle Kuzma, Craig. I couldn't have been more incorrect with my evaluation of who that guy was. He has really shown something. You don't have to run plays for him. He's really, really effective. Again, another guy that's probably a nice, a transition guy, kind of garbage scorer where you don't have to run about 17 different, half-court sets for, who's going to find a way to get his, just getting out and running, knocking down open shots in transition, crashing the boards, being physical, getting to the hole. It didn't really fit here. I don't want to commit to that. I don't want to commit to anything that we were doing over these past couple of years because I think we saw the ceiling. I think we saw the maximum. of what that group can do. And it was a good try. I get it. I understand putting a unique 7'4" guy that can shoot threes at high efficiency, a guy that's a sort of a bruiser, is a 3.5 in terms of Kuzma as part of a lineup. I get the approach. That made some sense to me. Let's try it. We did. It didn't work. We can't just keep doubling down on that. That would certainly be my advice there. It's painful, but you've got to sort of look at this roadblock that you run into, find a way around it. That may mean you go back down the road you just came and start to rebuild something. Because you can do an awful lot to win mid-30s games. You touch on some of the teams that are successful. Look at the Orlando Magic, for goodness sakes. Their whole deal was, if you're over 22, you ain't playing for us.
Right.
They got a bunch of kids. They went out there, probable rookie of the year, who was outstanding for them. They went out and ended up winning more games than they probably should have because they played a bunch of children. That's fine if that happens. You can't have nothing but in your prime veterans, blocking rookies and end up winning 35 games. It's just beyond unacceptable. So I understand moving on from Tommy Sheppard, but any part of that plan that sort of was leading to these kinds of results is not something I can commit to. Again, I think they missed their window big time here at the trade deadline, thinking that this would work. As soon as that All-Star break ended, they came out like toilet water. That was kind of the death knell for this team.
Yeah, definitely. And, Tommy, in that interview he did with me right before the break, was preaching patience. Yeah. And I almost feel bad, like, personally, because I'm like, that feels like it really haunted him. And I like you. Like, I think Tommy, I even through that interaction, like, I enjoyed talking to Tommy. I think he's smart. I think his hands were tied on certain things. But the resume is the resume, and it's 4 years deep at this point. So here we are. Danny will have more with Grant tomorrow, starting at 2 over on 106.7 The Fan. Appreciate you doing some overtime with me tonight here over on the Team 980.
You got it, brother. It was good to chat with you.
Indeed. Danny Rouyer, everybody. We get back. We'll take a couple more calls. Keep going here for a little bit, reacting to the breaking news that the Wizards have fired Tommy Sheppard on the Team 980.
Cards issued by
It's the Hoffman Show, extended overtime breaking news edition. I haven't even played the official breaking news sound yet. We got to do that.
Breaking news. Oh, snap, news is broken. Breaking news.
Yeah, we got big breaking news. The Wizards have fired general manager Tommy Sheppard. No, you didn't just mishear me if you just tuned in. Yes, this is the local show. Yes, we're still going. Yes, it's because the Wizards have fired general manager Tommy Sheppard. Taking your calls on it, 301-230-0980. If you are just tuning in, you just missed Danny Rouyer. You can catch that by rewinding in the free Odyssey app. But let's go back to the phones, 301-230-0980 for more of your reaction. Chris, thanks for holding. You are on the Team 980.
Hey, what's up, Craig?
What's up, Chris?
I'm glad they fired him, but they need to do a lot more before we get even to the players on the floor. We need a better scouting department. And unfortunately, as much as Wes is a good guy, you need a coach with a better system. I just don't like how he runs the team offensively, defensively. It just is uninspiring. So they have to take care of that stuff first. Like,
so,
we've been picking
Chris,
bad players for years.
I promise I'm going to let you continue. I genuinely want to ask you a question because I have a really hard time evaluating Wes because they've had so many injury issues and guys in and out, and frankly, I think the roster stinks. What is it specifically that you attribute to coaching that you don't like? Because you are certainly not alone in people who think that the Wizards can do better than Wes Unseld.
Well, in general, I hate most of the NBA offenses. I like teams that run motion. Like, I hate the pick and pop game. I hate the screen, and then once we can't get that done, we're just going to back the ball out, pound the ball, and I'm going to make a one-on-one move and score. That's not offense. What Sacramento runs is offense. I don't know why we didn't go get Mike Brown. That makes no sense to me why you wouldn't get a previous guy that was a head coach on the best team in the league. You wouldn't even go ask him if he wants to come be your coach. That's crazy to me. Now, I don't know if Ted would pay him or not, but that should have been an obvious choice. So, I mean, if you any team that runs off like a set offense, they have a formula, they have a strategy on how they're going to attack. That's who I want. Pick me anybody from those trees, and I would love it. But then again, you got to look. We never pick right talent. Like Johnny Davis is just getting on the court. That's crazy.
Yeah. There was a lot going on there. I will say that I really liked what I saw from Johnny Davis at the end of the year. I felt like at times, I felt like I was on that island early. Then a couple other people were like, "Hey, is there space? Can I plant my umbrella here?" And so we'll see. And Chris, I'm gonna let you run because we got a bunch of other calls. But I really appreciate the call. And maybe Davis turns out to be a decent player. Like the crazy thing is, if he turns out to be like a borderline all-star or he makes an all-star team, that's going to be the best pick Tommy Sheppard ever made for the Wizards. And that's not good. I know Rouyer scored 29 the other night. He's not very good. He is great in stretches, but the mark of greatness is consistency. And Rui Hachimura consistently is a negative defender and doesn't really do a lot for his teammates in terms of, getting them open, whether it's screen assist, actual assist, anything like that. He's a scorer that's not very efficient and is a minus defender. And they traded that guy to get Denny Avia, who's like a plus defender, but not like a great defender, who they tried to make into a great defender, and who, he can score 25 if you give him a ton of shots, but are you going to win games with Denny Avia getting a ton of shots? Like, they just don't have a lot of pieces that fit. And, to Chris's point, sure, I don't love the way they run their offense. In part, though, I think is use of personnel. And I think part of that was Tommy Sheppard on down. Tommy was the one talking last year about, we got to get Brad on the ball more. And then in the postseason press conference, he was like, we got to get Brad back off the ball. And it's like, you think? You think that maybe the guy that you gave a max contract because he scored 30 a game with Russell Westbrook and peak John Wall should not be a primary ball handler averaging 23, 5, and 3 turnovers a night? Maybe? Huh. Maybe they'll hire me. That'd be fun. Actually, no, that'd be terrible. I'd be so bad at that job. Call so-and-so and see if we can get some picks. Let's go. Wow. Okay. Jeff, hang on. I'm definitely getting to you in a second. Let's go to Daryl real quick, though, because Daryl's been waiting on hold. 301-230-0980. Daryl, you're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, how you doing today, everybody? What I want to say is this. Tommy Sheppard getting fired was a good thing for the organization for this reason. He drafted players that were nothing but role players and who can't even, fill their roles. Also, the coach is shaky. The players are supposed to be an extension of the coach. Whenever they got a big lead, somehow they give that lead up. And somehow the coach is sitting right there just cool and calm as the players are, cool and calm with no sense of urgency.
I'm Daryl, thanks for the call. I really do not like the theater criticism of coaches. Jay Wright, who is going to the Hall of Fame and is one of the greatest college coaches of all time, when Villanova won their national championship and Chris Jenkins hit that shot, the one against North Carolina, and it goes down, Jay Wright walked down, shook Roy Williams' hand, and then, walked off the court, basically. Like, he was happy, he celebrated with his players to an extent, but it's not like he lost it. And I realize that's a moment of celebration versus a moment of panic, but someone who is even-keeled, like Jay Wright, can go to the Hall of Fame. Mike Krzyzewski is widely considered the greatest college coach of all time, and Krzyzewski was a character on the sideline, all over the place. Yelling, stomping, screaming, cussing out refs, the whole deal. In the NBA, the same is true. Steve Kerr can actually be both. Depends on the night. Sometimes you get calm Steve Kerr, who's just trying to get Draymond to chill out, and sometimes Draymond's trying to get Steve Kerr to chill out. Like, demeanor isn't, like, in terms of theater criticism of what we see on the sidelines, is a really poor way to evaluate a coach. That said, the reason I have always said I need more on Wes Unseld, and I have been a little bit more definitive in how I feel about Sheppard, is the roster isn't any good. And no coach can elevate a roster of players who is not very good. Like, this team, if it's great, caps out, if all of it works out, at about 42, 43 wins. If the best version of themselves shows up, and that includes no injuries and the actual showing of the showing up. Again, the number prorated this year over 82 games, if Kyle Kuzma, Kristaps Porzingis, and Brad Beal play together, you take the 16-19 record they had in 35 games, multiply that by the fraction you need to get it to an 82-game schedule. It's a 37-win pace. So even if you say, oh, they play every game together and they get some added continuity, they go on a couple of streaks in there, a couple of losses turn into wins, okay, now you're at 45 maybe? Like, what are we actually competing for? And let's say you turn Wes Unseld Jr. into 2002 Phil Jackson. You really think they're winning 50? No. The roster's not good. That's why the general manager got fired. Not the coach. And again, that's not an endorsement of Wes Unseld Jr. as the greatest coach in the NBA. And I'm not even telling you that Wes is a good coach. Wes is very, very bright. And I actually love his demeanor with players. I love it with the press. I love it. Like, I think he's can handle that job in a lot of ways. But the magic with coaching is not actually how smart you are about X's and O's in a system. That's part of the equation. And we talk about this a lot on the football side, right? Everyone's running the same plays. Yes, Kyle Shanahan is the exception. Kyle has more plays than other people. And then guys like Sean and, Mike McDaniel, like, they all steal each other's stuff and they innovate off of it. And Andy Reid then gets involved and he's like, I see what you did. I'm going to tweak. Like, they're all kind of doing the same stuff at the highest levels of the X's and O's game. But what actually wins in the league is being an excellent teacher. Because if you've got good talent, like you've got a player who is to use like an NBA 2K rating or a Madden rating, a 98, but you can only get 87 out of him. You get an 87. You don't get a 98. Do you have a guy that in demeanor, sure, but also in coaching and teaching and in discipline, possession in, possession out, can genuinely get the most out of players? Now, I don't think that Wes has gotten the most out of this roster, but I don't think there's a whole lot left to squeeze. I just don't think they're very good to begin with, which again goes back to the general manager in the front office more than the coach. Again, the breaking news about an hour ago, a little less than an hour ago, Tommy Sheppard was relieved of his duties as president and general manager of the Washington Wizards. I'm Craig Hoffman, staying late, hosting a little bonus hour here. We're with you until 8. Take a few more calls, 301-230-0980. Let's go to Jeff. Jeff, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hi, Craig. It's good to talk with you. Craig, I was a 27-year season ticket holder, the middle section down low. So I've invested a lot in this team for many, many years, and I did not renew my tickets after the season because I was just continuously frustrated and disappointed by the team and really didn't enjoy the experience. I think that they made the right move, that Ted made the right move in finally firing Mr. Sheppard. I think that Sheppard's a nice guy. I don't understand how he was hired in the first place. He was the number 2 to a guy that was not successful. How do you hire the number 2? Why do you think that he's going to be any better than the guy that he learned under, unless he's somehow undermining the number 1 guy? So I didn't understand the hire in the first place, despite the fact that Tommy, is the nicest of guys that everyone explains. I agree with you regarding this team. This team is not built to win. They're not going to win anytime soon. Keep in mind that a number of the victories that they did have were against teams that were depleted. We ran off, 4 out of 5 or 4 out of 6 midseason. So the statistics are actually worse. The record is, in reality, I think, is worse than what it appears. The problem is we're saddled with Bradley's contract. It's a terrible contract. Brad, nice guy again. He's not a top 40 player in this league, in my opinion. I think we can go down the rosters of other clubs, and you can pick at least 40 guys that you would want more than him for the kind of money that we're paying, which is just insane. So we're saddled. The team does not defend at all, and that goes on the coach. And I think the problem with the coach, again, nice guy, he may have some talents, but I think that was a nostalgia hire. And with respect to nostalgia hires, they're tougher to get rid of. I think that on any other club, they wouldn't tolerate this kind of record. So, whether he can make a difference, a new general manager, it's going to take time. I would not sign Porzingis and Kuzma to big money. Because these guys, you got to start over.
Yeah. Jeff, let me ask you this real quick. You said you were a season ticket holder for 27 years. What made this year the breaking point? Because I think a lot of people would be like, well, they haven't been good in a long time. There's a lot of exit ramps you drove past in 27 years. What made this the one where you kind of got off the highway, so to speak?
Yeah, I've threatened not to renew for many years now, and I would come back because I'm a fan and I enjoy basketball. Yeah. But it was just so darn frustrating. I could not continue. I was going to the games and I was miserable, and that's just no way to spend that kind of money. There are better ways to spend your money than seeing a team that just disappoints.
Amen. So let me follow up with this. What would it take for you to buy back in a literal sense?
To understand what the plan is going forward. How are we going to change this? That's really what I need to understand. I've got to see that there's hope on the horizon for me to reinvest, because it's a significant price point, and as I say, there are better ways to spend my money. I can be frustrated watching at home.
I hear you. Jeff, thanks so much for calling in. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. 27 years. That's a lot of bad and mediocre basketball that Jeff has watched from his seat at Capital One Arena, Verizon Center, the MCI Center. How many more? Any others that I'm missing? Does that take us back 27 years? Probably. Okay. Wow. I think that's a great place to end the calls. I guess we might have time to squeeze in one more if anybody wants to hop in, 301-230-0980. But Jeff leads me to the point that I want to make at the end here, which is the fan base is in a very precarious position through Ted Leonsis' lens, like from Ted's vantage point. He's at like dangerous feels a little strong, but I'm going to call it a dangerous spot. For years, the Wizards have been able to hide behind the fact that the Washington football franchise is an unmitigated disaster of extreme largesse, a national attention absolute dumpster fire. And it is just no longer going to be the case in a month. Like, even if Josh Harris doesn't turn this thing around quickly, there's going to be hope in the Commanders franchise in a way that we have not seen for the better part of 25 years, with the obvious exception of 2012. But basically exclusively since 2012, we have seen the Commanders suck the hope out of this city. We have seen the Commanders be a team that attracts incredible negative attention because it was warranted, because they were not only an embarrassment off the field or on the field, but they were an embarrassment off of it, and at times worse. Something that you truly were ashamed of if you were paying attention. And the Wizards have been able to skate on that. Hey, well, it could be worse. It could be those guys. Could be the football team. And instead, now you have the Nationals who are like, yeah, we're rebuilding. We're in the middle of our own ownership situation. We'll figure it out. But I don't think most people really hold that against the Nationals. Like, everyone understands the Masson thing needs to be worked out so they can understand the franchise value, and then they can hopefully progress on a sale. We actually had Chelsea Janes on the show earlier talking about that as she broke the story today that Leonsis actually had bid $2 billion on the Nationals. So you got that for the baseball team. The Capitals have finally gone like, yep, it's time to rebuild. We tried. They'll try to ride out as quickly or rebuild as quickly as they can, see if they can catch something else with Ovechkin before he ultimately retires. But in a way, they're in kind of their Lakers end of Kobe era where it's like, yep, we're going to try to get some young talent, but we're also going to celebrate our superstar until he's done playing. And hopefully he gives us, we know he's going to put some butts in the seats, and hopefully he gives us a few more moments of magic. And then, like, by the way, you have other emerging teams in town, and the sports landscape is changing. And then there's the Wizards, who are just stuck in neutral, mediocrity, nowhere, no plan, or at least one that was worth having. And now is a time where Ted has to go. We have to do this differently. And that is my sincerely hope, is that if Ted Leonsis decides tonight to peruse the media landscape and take in the columns and say, hey, let's see what they did over on the radio. And he gets to this point in the show. Hi, Ted. Thanks for listening. What I would tell you is this. The business model in the NBA is different. It requires one of the 6 to 8 best players in the sport. And if you do not have one of them, you must, if you are serious about winning a championship, relentlessly pursue that. That sometimes means being very bad, but that is the only way to be very good. And this fan base knows all of that. And so I hope that this is a step towards being very, very good. Thanks to my boss, Chris Kiner, for stepping in the producer's booth, and we'll see you tomorrow at 3 or 4 on The Hoffman Show.
The Team 980.